Again, hello and a very warm welcome to today's session. My name is Praveen and I head product marketing here at Drivetrain. We are one of the sponsors of today's webinar alongside SpinFlow, and we are incredibly excited to have you join us for a very practical and an actionable 45-minute session where we'll talk about strategies and tactics to optimize 1, cash flow, 2, improve your business efficiency metrics, and 3, your profitability margins, and then some. I'll be introducing our expert panelists in just a minute, but before that, I'll quickly cover a few housekeeping items. As you may have already noticed, we are recording today's webinar, and the session will be made available to everyone on demand over the next couple of days. This will be available on both SpinFlow's as well as Drivetrain's websites. We'll also share the recording with you over email, so you could either play it back at your convenience or share it with your colleagues. All right. Without any further delay, let's start with the introductions. Naga, Manoj, looking forward to listening to your thoughts on the topic. Over to you both. Naga, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Praveen. It's really, I'm glad to be doing this webinar with you folks, and especially having Manoj as a co-panelist. I think it's going to be really good. My name is Naga. I'm the director of finance at virtual event startup Airmeet. We are, based in the US, team spread out all over the world, customers all over the world. We do virtual events, webinars. So you can imagine something like this, but on a different platform, or even for like much larger events. So that's what we do at Airmeet. And thank you for doing this once again, SpinFlow and Drivetrain teams.
Thank you, Praveen, and so glad to be part of this webinar. My name is Manoj Rathi. I'm CFO for a company called FarEye, which is into enabling digital logistics, and with a primary focus on last mile delivery across the globe, but based out of Noida, India. Chartered accountant, which is like CPA equivalent in India, 39 years of work experience, mostly into IT services space and manufacturing and a couple of startups. Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Manoj, Naga. Now, we know almost all companies out there are trying to reduce their spends regardless of the runway that they have. And investors especially, they're expecting some really radical efficiency measures, right? With the focus being on runway, efficiency, and growth, and in that order, right? So what does that require? Naga, let's start with the tactical ways to optimize cash flow. Now, we know that no company is better than its metrics. So when we talk about cash flow optimization, what are the top 3 metrics that you concentrate on?
Sure, Praveen. So in terms of cash flow optimization, if I'm talking from first principles, cash flow optimization basically just boils down to like how do you reduce your one part of it is your EBITDA or what trickles down from your P&L, and the second part of it is what is your working capital, which is how efficiently you collect money from your customers and how late you can afford to pay your vendors, right? And in theory, it's very easy to say that, yeah, I'll just collect from my customers immediately and pay my vendors really late and have a lot of cash sitting on hand. But the realities of business doesn't really allow us to do that. So on one hand, what I basically just look at is, let's say, just covering what are our major heads of income, and are we really getting the bang for the buck across like all those income streams, right? Like whether it is sales and marketing, R&D, G&A, or like what are the components, and just keep focusing on it. Like it's like a maniacal focus, and say that, hey, why is this number this? Why is it changing? Why is it increasing? Why is it going down? So sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue, R&D as a percentage of revenue, sales magic number, CAC payback, CAC efficiency. So these are like some metrics that will help us stay true in terms of on the P&L side of things. But yeah, so that's your like a small summary as well as like a short list of metrics that we typically look at.
Hey, thanks, Naga. That was very interesting. And Manoj, would you like to add to that?
Absolutely. So just to tell you, like FarEye is a Series E funded organization, which is like we can call it like a late growth stage startup. And for us, actually, I won't be restricting myself just 3 matrices, right? So I would rather bucketize host of matrices into 3 major buckets, right? Efficiency buckets, I would call it. And those would be like, around the revenue efficiency, operational efficiency, and capital efficiency. So pretty much similar to, what Naga just talked about. So revenue efficiency would include, one of the key SaaS metrics, which is ARR. And so we'd look at, what is the ARR growth on the new sales side, on existing customer side, upsell, GRR, NRR, net ARR growth, etc. And also look at NRR or ARR in different cuts also, like, regional cuts, vertical cuts, sub-vertical cuts, product cut, etc. On the operational efficiency side, essentially I'll be looking at, a P&L into various operating segments. The operating segments could be like, a regional cut, vertical cut, a functional view, expense view, those kinds of things. And where I would like to look at expenses in absolute amount as well as a percentage of revenue, including their trends, right? And also look at, a couple of those SaaS metrics, in various line items. On the capital efficiency side, basically what is the net cash generation or burn in a particular month? Yeah, sometimes in a particular month, there's a net cash generation as well. So net cash generation or net burn in a month. Working capital, how is it going? What is the cash position as on date? And, matrices around capital efficiency, like, runway, DSO, DPO, those kinds of stuff. Yeah.
No, I really liked a couple of things about that, Manoj. The first part being, you mentioned a variation of Goodhart's law there. When a metrics becomes a target, it ceases to be a good metric because, it can be gamed. And of course, when you focus only on one or two or just three metrics, what then happens is that basically the focus on that will come at the cost of something else, because all of these matrices, they push and tug on each other, right? So that was a great point. The second part that I really liked is that both yours and Naga's points, they complemented each other very well, because end of the day, cash flow optimization is one part controlling costs on your major line items, and the other part being, managing your working capital, right? And in fact, that is critical to understanding your cash conversion cycles, like you mentioned, because you need to monitor the liquidity and your fluctuations in your working capital, which then obviously leads you to better optimization of cash flow, and obviously also managing your account receivables much more effectively.
Right.
So thank you for that. And keeping these matrices in mind, what are the key strategies you employed in the last 12 to 15 months to ensure, one, cost control and improve cash flow? And Manoj, I would like to start with you, since FarEye achieved like a tremendous 70% reduction in burn just in the last year. So would love to learn about the strategies that you implemented that really work so well.
That's quite a lot, by the way. Like, it took us a lot of time to really, put all those things in place and to finally successfully reduce our cash burn by 70%. So let me just recollect and give you a couple of, high level things that we did, just to, to answer your questions. So I think first thing, sometime around February 2022, the leadership team met and to discuss how to take this company to the next levels. And so we were looking for a theme, and that aligns very well with our vision and aspirations. So the theme that we decided for the company is predictable, efficient growth, PEG, PEG. So we said that we have to grow, definitely, no choice. But we have to efficiently grow also, and with a lot of predictability, possible predictability, right? So with that theme, that the leadership team started, working on a long-term plan, which with a horizon of some 3 years or so. And then what we did is that we also translated that long-term plan, 3 years plan, into a P&L and the cash positions over the 3 years. And that particular thing really threw up a lot of surprises. Is that, and we first time ever, we sensed that we are actually setting a lot of flag. So then we took it back to the functional leaders. We discussed with them that it looks like, we are sitting on some flab, and the kind of long-term plan that we have prepared, and with this kind of a flab, we might be heading towards some sort of a disaster, right? So we need to take certain corrective actions now itself. But it was like, not really accepted by the functional leaders because they all felt that they are actually not sitting on any flab. So then we had no choice but to look externally. So what we did is that we brought in some external benchmarks for the validation of our thought process, and then could establish that, okay, there is actually a flag. So SaaS organizations of our similar size, we picked up data from them on headcount in different functions, costs, in different functions, etc. And then kind of, mapped it against what we had. And then we could realize that there is a flag. So once that got established, then, the planning and preparation started towards, reducing the flag. And we actually tried utmost to make itself as least, disruptive as possible. So then we bucketized the entire, cost reduction thing into two major buckets. First one was headcount, and there was a different strategy that we, adopted to figure out how much to reduce, where to reduce, etc., so that it doesn't disturb the operations. It doesn't disrupt the operations. And then there's a second bucket of costs, which is other than salaries and compensation and benefits. So on the headcount side, what we did is that, we a couple of things that we did is that we looked at as is organization structure, and we created a 2B organization structure with a clear focus on making it a very lean, agile, and customer-centric org structure, right? And then we started plotting right people to the right places in that org structure. And that's how we could figure out is that, these are the people who we can let go without impacting our operations or productivity at all. Then we did some, exercises, we had to do some one-time right-sizing exercise also to reduce a bunch of people. And also we did not backfill attrition. So combination of these two actually helped us meet our headcount rationalization target. On the cost side, we took a lot of actions. So for example, we looked at first, what are our top expenses? So it turned out to be that besides compensation and benefits, the top expenses we had was server, software expenses, travel expenses, marketing expenses, and legal and professional expenses. Those are like, top 5, 6, expense categories that we had. So what we did is that we first looked at individually each and every contract, vendor contracts, to figure out what are those not required contracts, what are those good to have contracts that we can get rid of, and then we moved them out. We terminated those contracts. We did some price renegotiations with a lot of vendors wherever it was possible. We changed some of the vendors. We looked at our office spaces across the globe and rationalized those spaces. That reduced our rental cost. We tightened a lot of policies, like policies around travel, etc., in a very sensible way. And we also introduced a variable component into the salaries of some leadership level people at that level. And we linked that variable component to their OKR achievement. Right. So those were a couple of things that we did, and that resulted in 70% kind of a burn reduction in a year's time. And in a present funding winter, we are very comfortably placed, and we see a very long runway for ourselves. Actually, we don't need fund for our organic growth at all. If at all we need fund, at this point in time, it will be only for inorganic expansion.
Hey, thanks, Manoj. I mean, that was, unfortunately, I think we could have, this itself in its entirety could have been a webinar, because I would have liked to sort of delve deeper into many of those points that you just mentioned. But unfortunately, we'll have to probably cut it short and keep it at that high level. But then there were a lot of practical takeaways. What we generally refer to as sustainable growth, I think you really nailed it by saying it should be predictable, efficient growth, in fact, right? Of course, if sustainable growth, at the end of the day, needs to be predictable, it needs to be efficient. And the second part that you mentioned about bringing external benchmarks, I think that is incredible, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to compare yourself not just internally, but against your peers, right? Similar size, similar industry, similar sales motion, and so on. And there are a lot of benchmark providers out there. And then once you compare that and you give that as a target for your internal teams, the entire mindset and alignment actually comes into being. So with that, and also all of the other things, like all the policies that you mentioned, and all of those things sort of make a lot of sense. And Naga, would like to understand in the context of Airmeet, all that was done the very key strategies that you had implemented in ensuring cost control?
Sure. So a lot of the things that Manoj mentioned, right, are also things that we ended up doing as well. We also did headcount optimization and all that, right? So maybe I'll focus a little bit on the revenues, on the revenue side and what we did in order to collect money from customers faster. So one of the things that we did was we tied up with like a financing partner. So we stopped losing deals for customers who asked for custom payment terms or who wanted to pay monthly, but we only offered annual contracts, right? So we just started looking at all the regions, and wherever we have getting the revenue from the biggest regions, which was the US, UK, and rest of North America, right? So we tied up with like a financing provider who could convert our annual invoice, but our customers could pay that provider on a monthly basis. But that's just one example. And then we changed sales compensation to make sure that reps get compensated only when we collect money versus when reps were doing the booking. Because we were seeing some amount of drop off due to bad debts, or reps were giving like really favorable payment terms and all of that stuff. So it's extremely tactical, but these are just some small tweaks that we did in terms of the incentives for the reps and in terms of adding more flexibility to them so that they're still able to close deals with the kind of flexibility that we want to give. But just to come back to another point, right? I think it all comes down to like resource allocation, right? How are you allocating your resources? What is the kind of ROI that you're getting? Because like Manoj said, everyone is going to say that I am the most efficient today. So and that's the reason why everybody loves SaaS metrics, because the metrics help us kind of stay true. And then, but sometimes you get comfortable with the metrics, and as finance people, we can kind of see through that, and we try to see if there's any more juice left to squeeze out of that, and that's where benchmarks come into play. So that's how I would put it.
Got it. This is again very, very interesting, because I really like the first part of the answer as well. One part of the answer rather, where you mentioned one was obviously you took annual contracts and you made them pay it monthly for those people, given the current economic situation. I've also heard about companies that have sort of introduced a pause so that they can retain all their data and then restart when the time is better. But then that obviously brought in a lot of questions around, hey, how do you actually process this in terms of ARR? Do you consider that to be churn, or consider that reactivation ARR, or how does it work? I think that's, again, it's a very different topic, and I think we can delve into that deeper probably if we have time at the end of this conversation. But then moving on from there, there's one thing that you mentioned about over there, which was about the resource reallocation, and this was one of the questions that we actually got in. And of course, this was one of the questions that people could submit before we came, and that was about, how did you go about resource reallocation, and is there a framework you can share? And when I was thinking about it, I was like, this is indeed an excellent question, because one, it is top of mind for many of us, where we need answers to, hey, where will our resources bring the most value? Or if you put it another way, which are the areas of our business which will have the most impact to our company's top line, right? And once you have sort of answered that, the second question is obviously, how much of this talent and budgets do we reallocate to new areas? And third, hey, how do we, end of the day, all of this is still on paper. We need to put, convert that into action. So how do you make that action plan, and how do you drive that alignment, right? So on this, would like to again put this question to you, Naga, first, in terms of, because you brought in this resource reallocation aspect. Would love to hear from you how it is that you've implemented this at Airmeet.
Sure. So maybe I'll give you the way we ended up deciding, like, which are the teams, like when we're doing the headcount optimization, which are the teams. And let's say if you look at the two large cost team compositions within any like SaaS company, right? It's pretty much R&D and sales and marketing. So if I'm looking at R&D, we also did like a benchmarking exercise similar to what Manoj did, but we did it with OpEx Engine in the US, right? So they were running some kind of a trial for just like their R&D benchmarks, and we worked with them in order to understand our entire software development lifecycle. And we understood that, are we developing products faster? How much of our product are we testing manually? How much of the product can be tested in an automated fashion? What is our product release frequency? What is the magic number equivalent for R&D? So let's say for every additional rupee that you spent in R&D, what are the other revenue metrics that you're getting out? You spend so much money on R&D. Are your ACVs expanding? Are you gaining market share for your ICT customers? Is your retention going up? So otherwise, what is the rationale behind the R&D investment? Or is it just that it's such a competitive category that you need to continue investing in R&D to make sure that your product roadmap kind of stays ahead of your competitors, so that your sales team still has a couple of features to position as one of the reasons to win, and in that category and also in general, right? So this is how we looked at just R&D as a function, where we saw on the engineering side, we worked with OpEx Engine, looked at the R&D benchmarks, the entire software development lifecycle. But on the other side, we also said, what are the features these guys are developing? Where is it going? And is it having revenue impact? And if it is not having revenue impact, is it helping us maintain or get market share? Because it's a feature game, and I always need to be at the cutting edge of like what kind of features and what kind of products that our demanding customers have to make sure that they continue using us, right? So that was on the R&D side. And then the same question on the marketing side, we looked at each and every campaign that was run, right? So we split marketing into brand marketing and demand gen, and tied every demand gen activity back into some kind of an ROI measure, either in the form of leads, in the form of a pipeline. And like Manoj was mentioning earlier, a lot of this data doesn't really make sense unless you cut it contextually. It could be when we looked at the demand gen data, we cut it by the intent of the leads, right? Was it high intent? Was it medium intent? Was it low intent? What are the regions from where they came from? What are the companies where they came from? In order to figure out efficiency, because I'm trying to get efficiency in 1 or 2 months from doing like a demand gen activity, but my sales cycle could be 6 months, right? So I need an early indicator in order to figure out whether like a campaign that I've done is on its way to success, or is it like is it on its way to becoming a dud? And then on the sales side, obviously it was just like your standard stuff to just look at who are the number of ramped reps and how are they contributing? Are they hitting quota, not hitting quota? Why are they not hitting quota? And what can we do in order to make that a little bit more efficient? And also the mix of how many SDRs or BDRs were there for every AE. Was it too much? Was it too little? Again, cut that by region, by SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and do the optimizations to make sure that whatever trade-offs that we're making, one, that we are aware of those trade-offs and we are okay with the consequences of whatever it's happening. So yeah, these are pretty much like there's some broad pointers and like how we thought about R&D and then how we thought about sales and marketing.
No, yeah, definitely is. I mean, those are the two of the biggest buckets when it comes to OpEx, and I think you sort of hit the nail on its head there. So, and Manoj, would you like to add on to that, please?
Yeah, mostly aligned with what Naga said. We did similar things. And one is that, doing external benchmarking is, I would say, relatively easier, but you need to be aware of your own landscape also. Like, it has to be very sensible. We can't simply just say that, okay, that company of this size is having so many people in product and engineering, so you should also be having the similar size. May not be true. You might be experienced, you might be a different company chasing different product, building different product, having different kind experience, different kind of a growth, right? So many factors are dependent on. So you have, whatever we do, it has to be done in a very sensible manner that really makes sense for the organization. So for example, in P&E, couple of things that we tried to do and that helped. Because P&E or product and engineering, essentially, you can't link directly to the revenue that is getting generated. Slightly difficult. And we have got like multiple products within the overall last mile delivery product. Like there's a shipping, there's a tracking, there's an experience, there's execution, etc., etc. So one is that we, put people into these different buckets, right? In terms of how many people we have in a particular product. Then we kind of did some sort of a product market fit, in the sense is that we took a view from the sales team. Is that, what is in your respective regions, where do you see sales are happening in which product? Right. So what is the existing, set of customers that we have against these products? And what is the kind of pipeline that you are expecting against these products? So map that. So look at how much revenue this particular product is expected to generate, and how many resource deployment do you have in that particular area? That is one way of looking at the data. Other way that Naga actually touched upon, we also did the same thing, is that how many resources we have deployed, on the new development, new feature development, right? or new product development, and how many resources are there for maintaining the existing products, improving the features of existing products. That kind of resource deployment also we looked at it. And from there, we could figure out is that, this is how we can possibly rationalize the entire headcount in PLE. Sales and marketing is relatively simpler because, it's attached to the new sales growth. So you can actually put a magic number to it. You can put on the marketing side, possibly you can say that how many SKU, different activities has generated. So you can link to that also and continue to improve on those metrics so that these costs continue to come down and, finally lead to profitability.
Excellent points again, Manoj. So sorry, a quick note before we move on to the next topic on sustainable growth, or as Manoj puts it now, predictable, efficient growth. There's a link to a cost savings guide for navigating a downturn that is being shared on the chat if you'd like to dive deeper into achieving cost efficiency, because that's the first topic that we have just covered. So moving on to the second topic, which is obviously balancing that very famous growth versus efficiency equation, which has become paramount today. Manoj, could you tell us a little bit about how you have been looking at growth at FarEye and your top growth metrics?
Okay, so first of all, this growth versus profitability, this actually also depends on the stage where a company is in, like early stage or an evolving stage of startup. They will focus more on, product market fit, establishing the product, proving the product, and growing the organization, right? But from growth stage, maybe mid or late growth stage, growth is definitely first and foremost. But then it has to become an efficient growth. Essentially, what it means essentially is that we have to now, this growth also should come along with the profitability. So this is always, a discussion item is that which one is more important. So for FarEye, I would say where we are at this point in time, both the things are important and both the things we are looking at it. So we are figuring out, we are constantly trying to figure out, ways to grow efficiently, effectively, and profitably. So, but anything that we do should not undermine growth at all. That is the key thing. So, but at the same time, how do we generate, profitability while we are not restricting growth at all? So maybe I'll say on the sales side or revenue side, since ours is a product which is proven product in the market, accepted by many marquee customers across the globe, and I would say it's a slightly differentiated product also, and not really a commodity product. So deal pricing is where we actually look at what is going to be our cost and what kind of markup we should keep, and we should not, go below that particular margin level. So that actually, at least we are in a position to, look at it from that perspective, that when we are pricing the deal, we are not losing out on money. Of course, there's a lot of competitive pressure. So we need to look at, what is the deal size, which market we are getting into. It's a new market, customer, etc., industry segment, etc. Looking at that, we, change our pricing up and down. But we make sure that we are not losing out on a particular deal in terms of our margin. So that is one side, we, a little cognizant about. And the other side is that, holding on to your costs and don't let your, cost levels increase. But when we say cost levels, essentially there are two types of costs, I would say. One with a cost which is fixed in nature, mostly G&A kind of a spend. So we keep a very tight leash on that, fixed cost G&A spends, so that, and continue to optimize on them and make sure that they are also not linearly growing with the growth, right? And other costs like variable costs or, direct function level costs and all those things, we try to link those spend to some sort of an outcome, some sort of an outcome. For example, I just said before is that, when we look at marketing spend, we look at, and different channels of marketing spend. So we look at, how much SKU that particular spend is generating. And then we look at like magic number is very straightforward number, right? So that we also do. On services business that we have, that takes care of implementation and change requests, etc. So there, our intent is not really to make money out of it, but what we essentially look at it is that at least we are net zero cost on that particular business. So whatever revenue we are getting out of this change requests and implementation, it is actually meeting the cost of the folks over there, cost of that team. So that's something we try to do to make sure that alongside the growth, we also are efficiently growing so that it turns into profitability. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Manoj. That was a very, very measured answer, I must say. And Naga, at your end as well, on the Airmeet side, what were the top growth metrics that you were tracking, and the tactics that you'd employ to find that growth at a very sustainable cost?
Yeah. So in terms of the growth metrics, I think growth metrics are similar for like all companies, right? We are all looking at like ARR growth, we're all looking at logo retention, we're all looking at revenue retention. But the point was about like what are the ways in order to enable the growth, and what can you do to kind of get that growth in a cost optimized manner. The interesting thing for us is that we are in a viral category. So a lot of times we get revenue, we get customers through someone else who attended an Airmeet. How many of us like knew Zoom before the pandemic or whatever, right? Like our entire category, including Zoom, got like a big bump from the pandemic because it has an inherent viral loop and a factor of virality that where customers attend and they're like, hey, this is interesting, and they come. So we came to know that one of the big sources of leads are actually people doing other Airmeets. And that's where we ended up doing like a partnership program with some marquee communities, and we came to know that CIOs and CXOs attend these community events, and we gave them large licenses to Airmeet, so that these people had like a recurring event that they keep doing, and they're like unsaid marketers for us because people are coming and attending these Airmeet events. They really love it. They find it a lot more interactive than Zoom events. And hopefully you guys will do your next event on Airmeet. But yeah, that's my plug for Airmeet in this webinar. But long story short, like that was one of the tactics that we employed, right? Like how do we open up the product to do what it's naturally good at and have that viral growth by itself, so that people can use it, experience it, and grow. So we started a free plan where people can come, just do events up to a particular size without having to talk to a sales rep, without having to do anything. In the future, we're going to do some more things around pricing, like Manoj said. But one thing that I want everyone to understand is that all of my answers are like much more earlier stage than the answers that Manoj is giving us, right? So because the stage of that is nuance that like a lot of us miss, and that is what I want to just re-emphasize. My answers are coming from like a single product, very less number of geographical difference, like most of our revenue from North America, and like it's very set in that sense. So product, the complexity in terms of business is all around how do we achieve the next level of growth, or how do we unlock it. But the context from Manoj's perspective is they're already like a much larger company, much closer to profitability, probably closer to getting listed. So nuance there is more in terms of different product lines, different regions. So that's the cut, right? I think if there's one thing that people should take away from this conversation is that there's no real set answer. The answer is always it depends, but you will only find out what does it depend on when you dive deeper and just double click and double click and double click, and in order to do that. So while some of these strategies, like let's say like what we did at Airmeet might be interesting, it might be 100% not actionable because it might not be something that people can go back and implement at their organizations. But the point is, think of the framework and think of the first principles behind it and see how you can apply it for your business.
Hey, that was also a very, very fair point, Naga. I think you really brought in a very important point over there. Contextualize all of these answers that are being given by you and Manoj. So that's very, very important, obviously. Now, actually on that front, we have been getting a few questions on the Q&A as well. And I think we can use that as a nice segue into the next section on our webinar today. And, the point is we have heard from you both on some very excellent frameworks, methods, and metrics to track to get insights into what needs to be done. But then that brings us to how you act on them, right? So how do you drive alignment across the board is the question that's come in. And well, how do we do it with rigor and discipline, right? There has to be a top-down push, or is it not? How do we get everybody on the same board, get them to agree on targets? I think Manoj touched upon this a little bit. You mentioned about benchmarks. I think that partly answers it, but would be great to understand how you do it at your companies. And because Manoj has already sort of answered this a little earlier during the webinar, Naga, I'll actually put this across to you once so that you also have the chance to sort of address this question on how have you driven alignment across the board at Airmeet?
Got it. So I'll just build on Manoj's answer, right? And I think that will be a good place to start. So to rewind, Manoj said we got a lot of insight by looking into and doing like a long-term plan, right? So typically we have a long-term plan, which is a 3-year plan. Then you have an annual plan, which is for the 12 months. And then you might have like a quarterly plan or an operating plan that gets refreshed as and when the quarter goes on and you look at your actual versus forecast. So the answer that I'm giving you is exactly what Manoj already said. Like, this is how we implemented our burn reduction strategy. And the answer is just 2 things. One is incentives, and the second one is planning, and the third one is holding people accountable, right? By tying that outcome back to the incentive. So we heard Manoj say we took a lot of senior people's comp and tied it to outcomes. That converted fixed to variable is what we tied it to an outcome. We tied it to a business outcome, and that's what we did. But just doing that, having those conversations with them is something I am not going to answer. I'm still going to leave some part of that. I would love to hear Manoj's perspective, even for me personally, but also for everyone else, right? So that is one part. And then the second one is holding people accountable, telling them that, hey, what is it that we want to achieve, and how are we going to achieve it, and how are we all going to help each other in order to achieve it, right? So planning, and that's where finance acts as like a very important pillar, because a lot of us work with founders who are engineers or technical in nature. So product sprints, product releases, product calendars come naturally to them, but planning calendars, financial reporting, doing things by the book is not something that comes very easily to them, right? So there was one of these quotes by one of our VCs, the erstwhile Sequoia India folks, who said that the role of finance is that to act like a GPS as well as like a braking system, as well as cruise control, as well as ADAS, all of these fancy technologies, to just make sure that the founders are not driving the car off a cliff or driving them off the freeway in a way that is not sustainable for the car to function, right? So that lane keep assist, right? So just making sure that we're going on the right track, and what is that track? So maybe that's where I will stop there and maybe hand it over to like Manoj to like fill in the blanks of what I mentioned.
Thanks, Naga. So just few things, just I would like to add, it's a very pertinent question that, we can figure out strategies and all those things, but how do we implement it? Because unless it is implemented, it has no real effect. So first thing that we did, and, and we thought that we did, and we actually did it also, is that we brought alignment at a leadership level, right? That we have to drive efficiency of the organization. And we transparently shared with them what is our current status and what is our future outlook looking like. And then we regularly maintained a cadence of it also going forward, right? And we also, tried to do something so that the entire leadership team, which could be like, senior leadership team, mid-level leadership team, etc., they feel like one team who is working towards a shared vision and goal. Right? So this is something, once you do it, once the alignment is, we have had the alignment, then things are much easier to implement at a ground level. Otherwise, it's always resistance, right? And around that, couple of things, also we focused on strategically. And anyway, it's part of, any standard organization, is that building and developing a performance-driven work culture with an outcome-oriented attitude based on certain core values, right? So this is extremely important that, you roll it out very clearly in the organization. All performance management system, everything around is just around one thing: performance-driven. If there's a performance, the performance will only be rewarded, nothing else. But the performance has to have the right attitude also, right? The result orientation, frugality, etc. Right? And then also build, a lot of, R&R programs around it so that people are motivated to achieve the targets, right? And, well-defined agile policies, processes also add to it. So, combination of all these factors, help us actually implement what we, planned and what we thought that we can do, take steps we can take to implement in the organization.
Thank you so much, Manoj and Naga. I mean, this is really such a great and timely topic, and I know we've just scratched the surface. But I'd like to start the final section of our session by highlighting that the key to putting all of these practices into place and continuously so, in that context, we'll probably just pull up a poll right now just to ask the role of tools and technology in all of this, right? I think there was also a Q&A regarding the same topic in terms of what does the finance tech stack look like. So because end of the day, you need some of these software, these tools and tech to make it happen. So we'll just bring up a poll on your screen right now. If any of you would like to take a demo of SpendFlow or Drivetrain, please let us know. That will be great. And the other part is that given that we are running out of time, we would like to move on to the closing thoughts. And we will obviously take the questions as we can, given the availability of time. So Manoj, Naga, one golden tip you can offer finance leaders trying to drive efficiency and profits during these very hard times. Naga, would you like to go first?
Sure. Sorry, I was on mute. So the final tip would be to understand the trade-offs of the decisions that we're making. Right. So because a lot of times we look at, and myself included, right? A lot of times we look at a problem, look at cost reduction, and say just like we use it as a blunt instrument to just bludgeon whichever functions that we think don't really have value. But we really need to drive deeper, understand the business, break it down to make sure that we are not unintentionally breaking something that's working. So understand the trade-offs, right? Like by doing something or not doing something, you're losing something, right? Everything, like in earlier in the webinar, Praveen, you said metrics tug on each other, and it's meant to act as a balancing mechanism. So the same thing even with trade-offs and decisions. So they have first order effects, second order effects, third order effects. It is our job to make sure that we think through it. And the planning and the FP&A stuff is just one way of doing it. But by working with the business closely, I think we'll also be able to get them into that thought process.
Okay, so I have got one golden tip and also platinum tip. So I'll go with, because you asked for golden first, so golden tip is very tactical one, I would say, which actually at FarEye, actually we benefited a lot out of it. Just wanted to share that. One thing that really made the difference is institutionalization of process and mechanism of rolling forecast in the organization to make the organization more predictable and proactive. So just implement and just see the effect, amazing effect of it. Whatever business decision you take, just blend that into a rolling forecast. Do your rolling forecast on a monthly basis. For this current financial year till the end of the year, month by month, and maybe some impact of next 1 or 2 years also. Just do it make it a habit to do this. That can always, sensitize the management that, the decisions that they're taking, what is the impact of it immediately, and the short-term and long-term, medium-term kind of impact. So that's the golden tip. Platinum tip is like, little, I would say, it's basically changing the mindset and the perspective of finance leaders in the organizations. How they look at their function, their responsibility. Do they look at more of an accounting, auditing, and compliance focused? And from there, they should actually move to become business partner in the value creation. So with that change in perspective, everything will fall in place. You will know exactly what metrics to chase, where to look at data, what needs to be done, under what situations, So that becomes a bigger, driving force that if you feel like business partner, then it's a different game altogether. Yeah.
I mean, I learned quite a bit today, and That was a great way to end the main session. So to quickly summarize, we saw some key metrics to focus on, how to act upon them to improve your cash flow, and at the same time, balance your growth with profitability. We learned about approaches that balance growth and your margin improvements. And all of this was to fundamentally create a healthy business where your cost structure is built for efficient growth, right? And we also saw speakers stress that this journey is an organization-wide effort. It requires strict discipline. It does require a strong top-down push. It requires good benchmarks, and which are very critical to driving all of this. And we also realized that, hey, if you do not have access to all of these key metrics to inform your decisions, think about you going on a trek. In fact, I'm just borrowing on the analogy that Naga was mentioning about it, right? In the sense he was using a car analogy. So it's like, you're going on, let's say, a trek. You don't know where it will end. You don't know how hard it's going to be, but you may have a general idea of where you're going. But really, without the right combination of tools and technology, you could get easily lost or sidetracked, right? And that's where software like SpendFlow helps you keep a very close eye on your costs and expenses, and Drivetrain helps you make sure you have a map to plan your growth, a compass to track your journey in real time, and even some diagnostics and simulation tools, all of ADAS and stuff like that to course correct as required to sort of make the trek successful, right? So I think there's just one more audience question, which we'll take up right after this if possible, but I think we are over time. So unfortunately, we will get back to you over email with some of these, all of the links that we have shared. So what we will do is, I think we'll have to start wrapping up. But Manoj, Naga, thank you again for sharing all of the practical aspects of implementing effective cost optimizations and margin improvements with all of the nuances that it comes with. And I really appreciate all of the audience participation and engagement. We'll be sending out a link to the webinar. We invite all of you to reach out to any of us as well. You will see our email contacts on the slide.